Mason sat on the edge of a cracked bench outside the crowded spaceport diner. It was late evening, the kind where purple skies met neon lights. He had just finished his long shift loading cargo crates onto freighter ships. His arms were sore. His clothes smelled like grease, and his only reward was a small packet of hot fries. He unwrapped them slowly, savoring the salty steam rising from the paper. But then he felt something, not the usual buzz of people or the humming airships overhead. It was a presence. He looked to his left and noticed movement behind the overflowing trash bin. It's just a flicker of shadow that moved too smoothly to be wind-blown garbage. Mason stood, fries still in hand, and took a few slow steps toward the bin. The smell got worse, but the curiosity pushed him forward. "Hello?" he called softly. No answer then, from the dark. Two glowing eyes blinked back at him, wide, alert, and frightened. It was a girl, no older than 15 in appearance, but clearly not human. Her skin had a pale blue tone, dirty and covered in bruises. Her hair was thin and silver, tangled like wires. She was crouched low, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, hiding behind a pile of rotting food and broken crates. She looked like a ghost, but her growl was real, a low, warning sound came from her throat, deep and sharp. Mason didn't move, didn't speak. He simply knelt down and slowly placed the packet of fries on the ground in front of her. At first, she didn't move. Then, the smell hit her nose, and her head tilted like a hungry animal recognizing prey. She crawled forward, her eyes never leaving his face. Then with quick, jerky movements, she snatched the fries and backed away again, shoving two into her mouth at once. Her cheeks puffed as she chewed like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Mason stayed silent, just watching her eat. The lights from the diner flickered, casting shadows that danced on her face. She looked tired, like someone who had run from something far worse than hunger. But even now, with food in her mouth, she kept one hand ready to defend herself. He realized then she wasn't just homeless. She was hunted. Some people nearby noticed Mason kneeling. They saw the alien girl behind the bin. A few laughed. Others whispered. One man in a leather jacket called out, "Careful, kid. Those things bite." The girl growled again, louder this time, her body tense, her eyes locked onto the stranger. The man scoffed and took a step forward before he could come closer. The girl leaped up with a snarl, her limbs coiled like springs. She didn't attack. But the message was clear. Stay away. The man raised his hands and backed off, muttering "freak" as he walked away. Mason's heart pounded, but not from fear. He was amazed. Even starving, weak, and alone, she still had enough strength to protect herself and him. She crouched again once the danger passed, her body trembling now, not from anger, but exhaustion. One fry slipped from her hand. She stared at it for a second before picking it up again. "What's your name?" Mason asked gently. The girl didn't answer. She licked the salt from her fingers, then stared at him with those glowing, unreadable eyes. He sighed, reaching into his coat for his own sandwich. He tore it in half and placed a piece on the ground. Like before, no sudden movements, no threat. She didn't take the sandwich immediately. Instead, she tilted her head like she was trying to understand something. It's like she had never seen someone offer without expecting something back. After a long pause, she crawled forward and picked up the sandwich slowly, almost respectfully. Then she backed away again and ate in silence. Rain started to fall light at first, then heavier. Mason stood and looked around. Everyone had moved inside. Leaving the girl and him alone under the weak shelter of the diner's awning, he took off his coat and held it out. The girl hesitated, then reached out with shaking fingers and took it. She wrapped it around her small body, her sharp shoulders hidden beneath it. "You can't sleep here tonight," Mason said softly. Pointed toward the alley that led to his apartment nearby. She didn't move, didn't answer. But her eyes followed his hand. He turned and started walking slowly, giving her space to choose. After a few seconds, he heard soft footsteps behind him, bare feet on wet concrete. She was following him. She was still cautious, but she had made her decision. Mason didn't know her story yet. He didn't know her species, her past, or her name. But one thing was clear: He had just made a silent promise, and she had accepted it with growls. Silence and stolen fries. Asterisk, the rain didn't stop that night. It poured like the sky itself was crying for her. Mason walked slowly, his footsteps echoing through the narrow alley. Each step splashed water onto his boots, but he didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear her bare feet stepping in puddles, soft and unsure. She was following him. The apartment building wasn't anything special. It's just old bricks and flickering hallway lights, but to her, it looked like a castle compared to the cold streets. Mason unlocked the rusted door and stepped inside. He hesitated before turning. Around, there she was, standing outside the doorway like a ghost afraid of light. Her wet silver hair clung to her face, and Mason's coat swallowed her small frame. "It's okay," Mason said gently. "You can come in." She didn't answer. After a long moment, she stepped forward, one careful foot at a time. Water dripped from her as she crossed the threshold. Mason closed the door behind her. Slowly, without making noise, his apartment was small. Just one room with a bed, a couch, and a tiny kitchen. But to the girl, it was another world. She turned in slow circles, touching walls, sniffing the air, even poking the curtains like they might bite her. Mason stayed still, letting her take it all in when she noticed. The soft blanket on the couch. She crawled onto it like a wild animal testing new ground. Then, for the first time, she relaxed. She curled up tightly, like a scared child, and didn't move again. Mason stepped into the kitchen, trying not to disturb her. He warmed up a bowl of soup. Simple and soft, no spices, just warmth. When he brought it over and set it beside her, she flinched, but then she sniffed it, leaned closer, and finally slurped it like she'd never tasted warm food before. She made no sound, but her shoulders dropped a little, as if the heat reached her soul. He sat on the bed, just watching her. Questions burned inside him. Who was she? Why was she out there? Was someone chasing her? But he stayed silent. Tonight wasn't for answers. Tonight was just about keeping her warm. The rain tapped the windows like gentle fingers. Outside, the city buzzed and blinked with light, but in this small apartment, time seemed to slow. Mason dozed off, unsure when sleep took him. He just knew that when he opened his eyes a few hours later, she was gone from the couch. Panic hit him fast. He sat up, looking around the room, door still locked, windows shut. Then he saw her. She had crawled next to the bed and was sitting there with her arms around her knees, watching him sleep, not like a stalker, but like a guard. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Calm but alert, she had moved silently, curled up like a protector at his side. "Hey," he whispered, voice hoarse from sleep. Her head tilted slightly, but she didn't move. "You don't have to guard me," he said softly. "You're safe here." She blinked slowly, then rested. Her head on her knees again. She didn't reply, but her breathing slowed. That was enough. The next morning, she was still there, still silent, still curled beside him. Mason got up and prepared some toast and more fries. The smell seemed to wake her faster than sound. She stood slowly, like someone who wasn't sure if the dream would continue. He handed her the food without a word, and she accepted it the same way. They didn't speak. But something unspoken had already started when Mason left for work. She followed him all the way to the transport station, hiding behind walls and trees. When he got home late that night, she was waiting in the hallway. The next day she did it again, and the next. People in the building began to notice. "Is that alien girl yours?" the neighbor asked, half laughing. "She's always sitting outside your door." Mason shrugged. "She's not mine," he said. "She just follows me." But the truth was, he didn't mind. He looked forward to seeing her every day, even if she never spoke, even if she only growled at others who came too close. And growled she did. Once, when a delivery man tried to hand Mason his order, the girl stepped between them, teeth bared. The man backed away without a word. Mason had to walk over and gently touch her shoulder to calm her down. She relaxed instantly at his touch.
I like her body recognized.
Only one scent of safety his that night. As Mason watched her eat fries from the old bowl he set aside just for her, he whispered to himself, "What are you?" but a small part of him already knew the answer. She was more than an alien girl. She was a survivor, and somehow, without words or reason, she had chosen him. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Mason saw it. He had just returned from the market with a small bag of food. Rin, as he had started calling her, was curled on the couch under a blanket he gave her days ago. She barely moved unless he did. Always alert but silent, she had grown used to his apartment. And Mason had grown used to her presence. But today was different, as she stretched her arms to adjust the blanket. Mason noticed something strange just beneath her neck. It shimmered, slightly faint and glowing, almost like it was alive. He leaned closer. "Careful not to startle her, Rin," he whispered. "Can I look?" She flinched but didn't growl. Instead, she tilted her head, allowing him to pull the fabric gently away from her collarbone. There it was, a glowing symbol-thin line shaped like a broken spiral. Pulsing softly with a cold light, it wasn't a scar. It wasn't a tattoo. It was something else, something living inside her skin. Mason's breath caught. He had seen marks like this before, but only in warning reports from deep space colonies. It was a mark of rejection. A tracker used by intergalactic scientists to identify genetically created beings, failed ones. He backed away, his mind racing. She saw the change in his eyes, and for the first time, her expression shifted fear. She grabbed her neck. Covering the mark with both hands, she turned away from him, curled into herself, and shook like a leaf in winter. She thought he would push her out, throw her away like all the others had, but he didn't. Instead, Mason walked over slowly and sat beside her. "I'm not afraid of you," he said quietly. "I just want to understand." She looked up, her eyes filled with something raw and fragile. Tears, silent tears sliding down her blue cheeks, the kind that came from deep pain, not just fear, that evening. Mason accessed the planetary database using a backdoor code from his old job. He searched the spiral symbol, and what he found chilled him to the bone. Project Varnock, secret experiment to create protector-class alien hybrids, fast, loyal, strong, and bred for guarding high-level officials. The program was shut down after one generation when the hybrids started resisting. Orders, most were disposed of. Others hunted for fear they'd turn violent. They weren't given names, only units. Mason stared at the last image found in the files, a younger Rin, caged, her eyes defiant even then. He shut the terminal, hands trembling. They had called her dangerous, uncontrollable, a mistake. But Mason had seen none of that, she had growled. Yes. But only when others got too close to him. She had slept outside his door, shared fries in silence, sat beside him like a silent shadow. Was that dangerous? Was that wrong? When he returned to the room, Rin was gone from the couch. Panic surged through him. He checked the hallway, then the stairwell. Nothing. He rushed outside, searching the nearby alleys, calling softly, "Rin," still nothing. Then he heard a soft shuffle behind the dumpsters at the end of the street. He rushed over and found her curled behind a crate, her knees pulled to her chest, her hands still on her neck. "I'm sorry," Mason whispered, kneeling beside her. "I didn't mean to scare you." She didn't speak, but she leaned her head slightly against his shoulder. Not a word was said, but that small motion was everything. She hadn't run away from him just from the fear of being unwanted again. And she had stayed close, just in case he forgave her that night. She sat on the floor next to his bed again. She didn't sleep. Her eyes remained open, watching him like she was guarding something precious. Not just him, but the bond they now shared. And Mason realized something powerful. The mark on her neck wasn't just a label of rejection. It was proof that someone once tried to erase her, but now she was being seen. He whispered into the dark. "You're not broken, Rin." She didn't answer, but for the first time, she reached out slowly and rested her hand on his blanket, touching, not taking, a silent thank you. And with that, the room felt warmer, not because of heat, but because she finally believed. She mattered to someone. Asterisk, it had been 2 weeks since Rin moved into Mason's life like a silent shadow. She no longer flinched at every noise, and her eyes no longer searched for exits in every room. She began responding to her name, sometimes with a soft blink, sometimes with a curious tilt of the head, but she still hadn't spoken. She still growled when strangers came too close, especially to Mason. He didn't mind, in fact. Her protectiveness became something of a strange comfort. He stopped questioning at this alien girl who ate fries like gold, slept beside his bed, like a loyal pet, and guarded him like a soldier. Still, Mason thought maybe it was time she saw more of the world. Maybe she could start trusting others too. So that morning he said, "Let's go eat somewhere nicer today." Rin didn't answer. But she stood up without protest. She put on the oversized hoodie Mason had bought for her and quietly followed him out the door. The diner was only a few blocks away, one of the few places that didn't ask for ID or species tags. It smelled like eggs, grease, and strong coffee. To Mason, it smelled like childhood. To Rin, it was new, loud, and full of strangers. They sat in the corner booth. Mason ordered for both of them pancakes. Eggs, fries, of course. Rin stayed close to the wall, knees tucked under her chin, her eyes scanning every face in the room. She didn't touch her food right away, not until Mason took the first bite. Then, slowly, she began picking at her fries. One by one, that was when the door opened. 3 figures stepped in tall, armored, and wearing silver bands on their shoulders. They weren't police, but worse planetary. Enforcers, private hunters, hired to capture, tag, or eliminate any unregistered life forms, and RIN ... was very unregistered. They scanned the room with cold, robotic eyes. One of them stopped when his visor flashed red. He looked straight at Rin, then pulled out a tablet. Tapping the screen, "Target confirmed," he said to his partner, "Species." "Varnak hybrid," Mason heard it. Rin did too, before Mason could stand. The lead enforcer approached their table. "Step away from the subject, citizen," he ordered. Hand already on his stun rod, Mason stood slowly, heart racing. "She's with me. She is unlicensed and genetically tagged as unstable." The man said flatly, "Step aside," behind him. Another enforcer raised a net launcher, Rin tensed, eyes flashing. Body lowering like a predator about to strike. "Don't," Mason started. But it was too late. The second enforcer fired. The net soared through the air, and Rin moved like lightning. She flipped the table into the air, using it as a shield. The net caught the table instead, crashing to the floor with sparks. Before anyone could react, Rin was on the first enforcer, grabbing his wrist and twisting it until the stun rod clattered to the floor. She didn't roar or scream. She moved with precision, silent, fast, terrifyingly calm. The other enforcers lunged, but she was faster. A spinning kick knocked one back into the counter. Sweep of her leg took the other off balance. Mason watched in stunned silence as Rin is quiet. Gentle Rin fought, like a soldier trained for war. Within seconds, all 3 enforcers were on the floor, groaning or unconscious. The diner had gone completely silent. Everyone stared, forks frozen in midair, drinks left halfway to lips. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the cook behind the counter ducked and watched from under the stove. Rin turned back to Mason, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her hoodie was torn at the shoulder, revealing the faint glow of the mark on her skin, but her eyes were on him, not with fear, but something like panic. Would he be scared now? Would he leave her? Mason took one step toward her and placed his hand gently on her arm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lowered her head like a guilty child. He whispered, "It's okay," and guided her toward the back door of the diner. No one stopped. Them? No one even dared to breathe until they were gone, outside, in the alley behind the building. Rin collapsed to her knees. She didn't cry, but she shook. Mason crouched beside her, pulling her close. "You didn't hurt them," he said softly. "You only stopped them." She looked up with wet eyes, finally whispering the first word he'd ever heard from her lips. "Dangerous." Mason stared at her, stunned. Her voice was soft-broken and trembling, but it was her voice. "You're not dangerous," he said. "You're protective." She blinked, confused. He nodded. "You saved me." And for the first time, Rin's lips trembled with something. Close to a smile, a small one, but it was real in that moment. Mason knew this girl wasn't just following him. She had chosen him. Mason's apartment was silent that night. No soft hum of music, no boiling soup on the stove. Only the sound of rain tapping against the window and Rin's slow, even breaths. She sat on the floor again, wrapped in his old hoodie. But this time, she wasn't guarding him. She was staring at her own hands like they belonged to someone else. The memory of the diner still lingered, the way she had moved so precise. So fast was not random, it was training. Mason had seen military footage of elite soldiers, but even they didn't move like Rin did. It was more like instinct than skill, and it scared him not because of what she could do, but because she had lived a life where she had to know how. She hadn't spoken again since whispering dangerous. But Mason couldn't get that word out of his head. What had been done to her that made her believe that about herself? He sat beside her on the floor, a steaming cup of tea in his hand. He placed it near her without saying a word. She didn't reach for it. But she didn't push it away either. That was progress. Do you? Remember where you came from? Mason asked gently. Rin didn't answer for a long time. Then her fingers moved, trembled before she spoke in a quiet, jagged voice. "Steel walls," she said. "No sky." Mason stayed silent, letting her continue. "No names, just numbers." She whispered, "They made us strong." Fast, but not soft. She pointed to her own chest with a trembling finger. "I broke the rules." "What rules?" Mason asked softly. "I protected a weak one," she said, voice bitter. "I was punished. They hurt me and said I failed." Mason's chest tightened. She hadn't just been a science project. She had been punished for kindness. "How did you escape?" he asked. Rin stared at the wall for a long time before answering. "During cleaning cycle, lights off, I ran." She looked down, shame flickering in her eyes. "I left others behind. You survived," Mason said quietly. "That's not weakness." She shook her head. "Not survival. Accident," but he knew better. Rin wasn't here by accident. She had clawed her way through something most people would have never survived. And now she was sitting on a dusty floor, drinking warm tea beside a stranger who gave her fries. That wasn't an accident. That was will. She pulled down the hoodie slightly and exposed the mark again, the glowing spiral. "Always follows," she muttered. "Always watching." Mason leaned closer, examining it. "It's not just a tag." "Is it?" he asked. Rin shook her head. "If I'm close to others, they find me." His heart sank. That's how the enforcers knew she was in the diner. They weren't tracking her face. They were tracking her presence, as long as the mark stayed. "Rin could never be safe, not here, not anywhere. Can it be removed?" he asked. Her shoulders lifted slightly, then dropped a helpless shrug. "They said if we run." "Mark explodes." Mason's eyes widened. "Explodes." She nodded slowly. "I ran anyway," she said softly. "Didn't care if I died." Mason sat back, stunned. Rin had risked death just for a chance at freedom. Now she lived off toast, fries, and borrowed hoodies, and still watched him like a guard dog. She didn't fear death. She feared being sent back. "You're not going back," he said firmly. Rin blinked slowly like she didn't understand the words. "I'll find someone," Mason continued. "Someone who knows how to deal with this mark." She looked down, almost ashamed. "You help me?" she asked. Mason reached out, took her hand gently. "I already am," he said. "You're not a project, Rin." There was silence again, but it was softer now, like both of them could finally breathe, even just a little. Rin curled her fingers around his, gently, a quiet act of trust. Then, for the first time, she asked something of her own. "Why?" She whispered, "Why care for me?" Mason didn't answer right away. Looked at her, truly looked. "I didn't realize he didn't need a reason. He looked at me like I mattered," he said softly. "Even when you didn't speak, and when you growled at everyone else. It meant I was yours." In some way, Rin's lips moved again, barely a smile. But her eyes shimmered with something human hope. That night, for the first time, Rin climbed onto the couch without fear. She didn't sit curled in a ball. She stretched out like someone who belonged there. The hoodie wrapped around her like a shield, and Mason knew he wasn't just helping her escape the past. He was helping her build a future. Asterisk Mason had never walked through the Undercity before. Not like this. Not with fear in every step. Not while guiding a girl who could be killed just for existing. But now he had no choice. Rin's mark was glowing. Brighter each day, and the risk of being tracked had become too real. They couldn't hide anymore. They needed help. They needed someone who lived outside the rules. The Undercity was built beneath the main streets of Orion Port. Dark tunnels, flashing signs, and stalls that sold things not found in legal stores. Here nobody asked questions. Not about species. Not about pasts. Not about marks glowing beneath the skin. It was the only place where Rin could walk beside Mason without eyes on her back. Even then, she stayed close, so close, their arms brushed with every step. She didn't speak, but her hand clung to his coat like it was her lifeline. Mason had only one lead. An old contact from his cargo Deza smuggler named Vex, half human, half machine, and fully untrustworthy. But if anyone could help remove a genetic tracker, it was him. They found Vex deep in the neon caves. Inside, a rusted ship-turned workshop. Metal limbs hung from the ceiling, tools buzzed in piles, and wires sparked like fireflies. Vex turned slowly when they entered, his single red eye scanning them with sharp interest. "Mason," he said in a cracked voice. "Didn't think I'd see your honest face down here." Mason stepped forward, holding Rin's hand tightly. "I need you to help her," he said. "Remove a mark." Vex's eyes zoomed in on Rin. Pausing at the faint spiral on her neck, he whistled low. "Oh, you brought me a walking bomb." "She's not a bomb," Mason snapped. She's family," Vex chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You sure you want to get tangled in this, Mason?" he asked. "They'll track you too. If they catch wind, I don't care." Mason replied. "Can you do it or not?" Vex sighed, his mechanical fingers clicking against the table. "Maybe," he said, "but the procedure's risky." Rin stood silent, her eyes never leaving Vex. She didn't flinch, didn't show fear. Only calm determination. She understands. "The risk," Mason said. "We both do." Vex nodded slowly and gestured to the back room. They stepped into a cold chamber lined with glowing panels and humming machines. Mason helped Rin lie down on the metallic table. He brushed her silver hair away from her face and whispered, "I'm here." She nodded once, then closed her eyes. The process began. Blue light flooded the room as Vex used scanners to map the mark's signal. He mumbled terms Mason didn't understand: neural locks, subdermal tags, fail-safe explosives. Then he pulled out a long, needle-like tool that hummed when activated. "This'll sting," he muttered. He pressed the tool to Rin's neck, and her body jolted. Mason reached for her hand, and she gripped his tightly. No scream, no tears, just a deep, steady breath. She was stronger than anyone he had ever known. After nearly an hour, Vex stepped back, wiping sweat from his metallic brow. "It's done," he said. "I deactivated the signal, but the mark will never fully vanish. It won't glow anymore, and it won't broadcast. But if someone scans close enough, they'll still see traces." Mason looked at Rin. Still lying still, breathing slow. "That's enough," he said. "Thank you." Vex shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. There's a price." Mason's stomach dropped. "What price?" "Your job, your home, your safety," Vex said bluntly. "From now on, you're on the run too." Mason didn't hesitate. "I gave those things up the day I gave her my fries," he said. "This is just following through." They left the Undercity that night, under a false name, new IDs, new clothes, new ship. Rin walked beside Mason through the docking zone, her hoodie pulled tight, but her steps lighter than before. The constant fear in her shoulders seemed to fade, not gone but. No longer crushing, before boarding the shuttle, she turned to Mason and touched his arm. "You stayed," she whispered, voice softer than before. Mason looked down at her and smiled. "Always," he said. "I don't abandon the people I care about." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. As the doors closed behind them, and the stars opened up ahead, Rin looked forward not to escape, but to begin. For the first time in her life. She wasn't being hunted. She was moving towards something. When with Mason at her side, she wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. The sky above the quiet colony was not like Orion Port. No neon signs, no shouting vendors, no sirens screaming in the night. Only stars clear, bright, endless. The colony was small, hidden on the far edge of a green moon called Sorellin, a place where outcasts came to disappear. And it was here that Rin finally learned what peace tasted like. She and Mason had been living there for 3 weeks. They rented a small dome-shaped house near the forest line. No cameras, no scanners, no patrols. Just wind in the trees and the smell of warm bread from the nearby kitchen stalls. It wasn't paradise, but it was free, and for Rin. That was everything. She no longer slept on the floor. She had her own bed, now a soft nest of blankets that she built herself. She even picked her own clothes from the local trader, still oversized hoodies, still dark colors. But they were hers. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was choosing. Each morning, Mason made toast and tea, and each morning, Rin brought back something from the forest berries. Leaves, shiny stones, her way of giving back. She didn't speak much, but her eyes said plenty. They said thank you. They said I trust you. And sometimes, when no one was watching, they said I'm happy. One afternoon, while Mason was fixing a leak in the roof, a young couple from the colony walked by. The woman smiled and waved. The man gave a polite nod. But when they got too close to Mason, Rin appeared from behind the tree, silent and still. She didn't growl at first, just narrowed her eyes when the woman stepped even closer. Rin stepped between them and let out a low, rumbling sound from deep in her chest. Not angry, not wild, just a warning. The couple froze, smiled awkwardly, and moved on. Mason chuckled from the rooftop. "You've still got it, Rin," he said, wiping his hands. She looked up at him, and for the first time, gave a small smile while growling. Like it was a joke only the two of them understood. Word spread in the colony quickly. The silent girl who guards her human. Some people were curious. Others kept their distance, but no one dared to challenge her place beside Mason. She wasn't just his shadow anymore. She was his protector, his friend. And in a way no one could explain, maybe more. One evening, Mason took her to the festival in the colony center. Music played from handmade speakers, and glowing orbs floated. In the air like dancing fireflies, Rin stood beside him, her fingers gently curled around his sleeve. People watched but didn't stare. Children ran by. Some even smiled at her. A small girl offered her a caramel fruit. Rin took it carefully, sniffed it, then gave it a hesitant bite. Her eyes widened at the sweetness, and a quiet hum of joy escaped her lips. Mason smiled. "Told you, some things are better than fries." She blinked slowly, chewing with satisfaction, then gave him a sideways glance, still like fries. She whispered, voice almost shy. It was only 3 words, but they made his chest warm. That night, after the festival, they sat by the fire pit outside their home. The stars above them looked close enough to touch. Rin rested her head on Mason's shoulder. Silent and calm, no tension in her body, no fear in her eyes, just quiet. Breathing and soft trust. "You've come a long way," Mason said gently. She nodded, eyes half closed. "You're not dangerous," he added. "You're just protective." Rin sat up slightly and looked at him. Then, with the smallest grin, she whispered, "Only growl for you." Mason laughed. "Lucky me." She leaned back against him, and they stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing, needing nothing more. The girl who once lived behind a trash bin was now surrounded by trees, stars, and laughter. She still didn't speak often. She still growled when others got to. Close, but now she growled with a smile, not because she feared losing Mason, but because she finally believed he would always stay, and in this quiet corner of the universe, where no scanners beeped and no enforcers hunted, a girl once branded as dangerous became something else, something rare, something powerful. She became loved.